All right, everybody out there on the tubes of the internet, welcome to another exciting edition of This Week in Space. I'm your host with the most, Joan Emerson Bell. I'm a astrologer, tarot reader, licensed mental health counselor, and I like to show up each and every Monday at 11-ish to give you the astro weather for the week. And it's been kind of a doozy. I'm really feeling that Saturn Mars conjunction that occurred on Sunday. And some feelings of burnout. Feelings of overwhelm. I don't know if y'all are feeling that, but if you are, it's right on point with the astrology. And we got Mercury coming in this week to tell us some stories about it, which I don't know, Mercury hanging out with the malefics tends to be pretty malefic. So the stories that we are concocting about how we are feeling may not be the kindest and the nicest, but you know what? That's all right. That's why I'm here to help walk you through it, help us all walk each other through it. And later in the week, we got one of the bigger astrological events of 2026 as Uranus, the planet of freedom, liberation, revolution, and upheaval, will be moving into the mutable air sign of Gemini, which, that'll last for the next 7 years or so. So we'll be talking about that as well. But before I get into the week in space and your astro forecast, I just want to let folks know that I'll be co-facilitating an Oracle Dream Retreat in Greece. This is going to be occurring May 8th through the 15th, and we will be visiting various ancient sites and explore the precognitive power of dreams. And if you are interested in learning more about this retreat, or you want to come check it out, you can follow at Sarah Jane's Dreaming on Instagram or go to the website themysteries.org. And I believe Sarah is wrapping up a retreat right now with the brilliant astrologer Ariel Gutman. And it's going to be a good time. Also, Sarah does a bunch of retreats throughout the year. So if you are interested, check out at Sarah Jane's Dreaming or go to themysteries.org. And I believe there's one or two spaces left in the retreat that I'm going to be co-facilitating. So if you're interested, hit her up or you can DM me for more information. And I'd love to see you in Greece. Another announcement. I do a astrology themed radio show called the Melee Report. You may or may not know that. It's much like this program, except for more rock, less talk. And I just put out a pretty excellent and epic episode for the Aries new moon. You can find that on my SoundCloud at Camp Wizard Camp. I also have a link to it in my stories on Instagram. I'll put a link to it in the show notes for the podcast and the YouTube. But yeah, if you want to get your astro weather with less talk, more rock, I highly suggest the Melee Report. And this episode is fire, if I do say so myself. Anyway, that is all the announcements that I have. So without further ado, let's get into this week in space, shall we? All right, my friends, we are looking at this week in space for April the 20th through April the 26th for year of our Lord 2026. So, starting us all off, Monday, April the 20th, we've got a couple conjunctions that are occurring today. We have Mercury in Aries conjunct Saturn in Aries at 7 degrees and 55 arc minutes. And then Mercury will move on to conjunct Mars. Mercury will move on to conjunct Mars in Aries, the ruler of that cardinal fire sign at 8 degrees and 36 arc minutes. Both of these happening today. The Mercury Saturn conjunction happened earlier in the morning, and Mercury Mars will occur in the afternoon, but it's sort of all mixed up in conjunction stew. And let me just share my screen for the folks on the YouTube. Bam. So there we go. We got this, if I can. There we go. So we got Mercury over here at 7 degrees, 55 arc minutes in this spicy stellium over here in Aries. So Mercury right with Saturn. This is occurring at 5:22 a.m. That's Mountain Time. Yeah, that's where I am. And then later in the afternoon, Mercury will perfect their conjunction with Mars. But yeah, we've got this whole kind of situation going on with Mercury, Saturn, and Mars. So on Sunday, we had the Mars Saturn conjunction. Now Mercury is kind of coming in to join the party. Yay! And I don't know about y'all, but Sunday's conjunction felt pretty intense. And for me, it felt like holding a ton of energy in my body, but feeling incredibly tired. So there was nothing that I could really do with that energy. And with Mars and Saturn, high potential for burnout and feelings of frustration. Mars is sort of like the gas pedal, Saturn's like the brake. And if you're pushing them down simultaneously, it's going to burn up all your fuel and maybe burn out your engine. And so now we have Mercury joining this party. And with Mercury coming in, Mercury is our cognitive processes, our thinking ability, our communication, how we talk to ourselves. And it's kind of the stories that we tell about what's going on. And so now that Mercury is coming in to meet Saturn and Mars, the gas pedal and the brake, Mercury is telling stories about what's going on and telling ourselves stories about how we are feeling, or maybe how we are supposed to be feeling. In Mercury, a trickster, they are kind of like a chameleon, and they take on the characteristics of whatever planets they are hanging around. And now that they are in conjunction with both of the malefics, they're going to behave like a malefic. And the stories that we tell ourselves are probably not going to be very kind. There may be some overthinking and feelings of anxiety. And, full disclosure, I woke up this morning feeling that, oh, I don't have any energy. I overslept. And then that starts a story about who I am as a person, like what is possible, what is impossible. It's never going to work. I'm never going to get this report out, and so Mercury may be amping up some of the anxiety that we might be feeling from experiencing like low energy or frustration. And it might bring in thoughts of self-criticism, self-judgment, as Mercury kind of meets up with this conjunction. I think that there's a high potential to take whatever we are feeling and to concoct a story about it. And that's a story may have some pessimism and some self-judgment wrapped up in it. And so you just might want to notice the tone that you are speaking to yourself with and the ways that you might be extrapolating little bits of information around things that aren't working, around feeling low energy, and blowing them up into bigger stories that dictate how we think of ourselves or what we think might be possible in the future. So Mercury makes their conjunction with Saturn first, which occurred like 5:30 in the morning Mountain Time. And Mercury, Saturn can really activate the inner critic and cause us to sort of second guess ourselves or to create the uh, stories around the feelings that we are experiencing and also create feelings that, I can't express myself or I shouldn't express myself or I don't know how to say this. And it can lend itself to pessimism, and we may find ourselves focusing on what's not working today. And the benefit of this transit is that Saturn can help us to kind of focus on mental projects. Saturn is limiting. And so while in some cases it might be like, oh, I'm stupid, I can't do this, I can't figure this out. Saturn also provides guardrails and structure. So if we're like, okay, well, I can't figure out all this stuff, but I can focus on this project that does have some guardrails, it can actually be pretty beneficial. And Saturn is sort of in it for the long haul. And so it can keep us kind of working on something or chewing on something, which can be great if we put that to productive use. However, if we are just chewing on, oh, I don't feel good, or like this is never going to work, Saturn can kind of lock down on that. There can also be kind of a narrowing of scope with this conjunction that allows us to lock into one idea. And we just want to be careful that the idea that we're locking in on is not causing a negative thought loop or a fear that is creating anxiety. And if that's the case, see if you can find something maybe more productive or enjoyable or neutral to sort of feed your mind so it can gnaw on that today and just until this transit passes. And, Mercury is moving pretty quickly through the zodiac. And so it's not going to be like this forever. I guarantee you. Um, and I think another component with Mercury joining the Saturn Mars situationship over here in Aries is Saturn is in their fall in Aries. And they're my experience of this is this like I'm working really hard, I've got to do all these things, and it feels like I'm not getting anywhere. And this is Saturn in their fall. Like I have to work harder, but I'm not going anywhere. It feels like running on a treadmill or just treading water. And then Mars comes in and is like, we gotta go, we gotta do this, come on, push it, you gotta fight. And so it like really amps up that sort of fire and pressure that Saturn is putting on us and putting on ourselves, and it can feel very frustrating and create feelings of burnout. And then Mercury again joining this is like telling the story about like, oh, I'm a bad person because I'm working all the time and I'm not getting anywhere and it's never going to work. And so we just want to notice if we're getting caught up in these thought loops and see if we can step back for a minute and be like, that's a story. That's a funny story, instead of getting pulled into it and locked into this story. Because I don't think that story of it's never going to work, I'm never going to get anywhere, this is all futile, I'm trapped, I'm stuck, is really going to do anything for us, except for kind of keep us caught in that thought loop. And so with this transit, with today, just seeing if we can step back and kind of observe our thoughts without getting pulled into them. And I think that will be really helpful because I don't know, my experience of it is it's not pleasant. And that can be okay because unfortunately it doesn't get to be pleasant all the time. However, again, Mercury is moving quickly and we will move through this. So, also Monday, April the 20th, again, we have Mercury in Aries conjunct Mars in Aries. This is occurring at 8 degrees and 36 minutes. This is Mercury perfecting their conjunction with Mars, but still all up in that Saturn vibe. And coming back to the chart, I'm not going to move it along, but you can see Mercury and Mars right here as well. And so later in the afternoon, Mercury will perfect their conjunction with Mars. Mars is in their domicile, their home in Aries, and has a lot of energy here. However, it just ran into the brick wall of Saturn, which may have left us feeling tired and frustrated. And now Mercury is going to tell a story about all this. And the stories that I personally tell about being tired are usually very self-critical. And, that's not a pleasant story to tell. Mars also likes to fight. I don't know if you knew that. So they may be looking for other things to blame as a way of moving that judgmental energy through. And, we also want to observe these thoughts. If we are copying resentments or blaming this thing or blaming that person for why it's not working, for why we feel stuck, that might feel pleasurable in releasing some of the pressure, but I don't know if it's going to do us a lot of good in the long run. And there's something very like pleasing about resenting things, and like just grinding that axe. but I've found that it has never actually helped me and usually just increases my personal suffering. So, you know, there also might be feelings of anxiety due to the kind of pent up energy generated by Mars's meeting with Saturn. And now we have Mercury coming in and trying to process things on a mental level. And Mars is a blade, and with the pent-up frustration or anxiety, that blade may also get turned in on ourselves. You know, we might go through all the people that we resent and judge and be like, ah, it's not satisfying yet. I'm just going to start stabbing myself and blaming myself. So just be aware of that. And again, see if you can kind of notice your mind going into story or judgment, and this transit will pass in about a day or so. And so just see if you can notice your thoughts without getting hijacked by them. And if you're telling yourself stories about how things are or how things should be, just see if you can notice that. And just notice that it's a story and see if you can tap into what's actually happening in the moment, what's happening in my body, what is the actual sensation of being here, what is the feeling that you are experiencing, not the story that you are telling about it. And if you're frustrated, like that's fine. Can you just sit with that frustration and be like, huh, where do I notice this in my body? What is this like? What is the actual quality of frustration? Instead of being like, oh, this frustration is because that person did this thing and now I hate them forever. So like just kind of reel it in a little bit. And Mar Mars and Mercury can give us a lot of mental energy, and Saturn can kind of help us structure and direct that mental energy. And so I think about this as, Saturn being a pipe and Mars, Mercury being the water flow. And instead of it spilling out everywhere, seeing if we can direct it through a pipe into the place that we want it to go. So having projects or ways of focusing that mental energy through writing or a task that requires a lot of mental focus might help to release some of that pent up energy and disrupt some of the thought loops or stories that we might find ourselves caught in today. Okay. Moving on to Thursday, April the 23rd. Let me switch the chart around. Uh, Okay. We have Venus in Taurus conjunct Uranus in Taurus at 29 degrees and 53 arc minutes of this Venus ruled fixed Earth sign. And so over here we can see Venus and Uranus just like right at the edge of Taurus. And by the end of the week, they will both be in Gemini. Okay. So Venus, ruler of Taurus, has been sort of the landlord of Uranus for the past 7 years. And this meeting at the very end of the sign of Taurus at the anaretic degree, the 29th degree, feels like kind of powerful. And then 2 days later, later that day, Venus will enter into Gemini. And then in 2 days, Uranus will leave this fixed Earth sign and go bring its brand of sudden, unpredictable change into Gemini as well. And they will then be Mercury's problem. So with this conjunction, Venus and Uranus, with this conjunction of Venus and Uranus, it kind of seems like an opportunity to review the past 7 years and to reflect on how our values may have shifted, our likes and dislikes, what we find beautiful, what we find pleasurable, how we relate to our resources, how we find and do stability and comfort, as well as how we love, who we love, what we love, and how our understanding and engagement in relationships may have shifted over the time that Uranus was in Taurus. And this feels like a kind of powerful moment of integration where landlord Venus and tenant Uranus meet before Uranus hands the keys to Taurus back to Venus and moves off into their new abode. And I'm pretty sure that Uranus is not getting their security deposit back after these past 7 years. I think that the place of Taurus has shifted a lot. But this is a time when these two archetypes get to kind of come into connection and share a reflection on the past 7 years, which, feels kind of powerful and sweet to me. And so, as these planets meet at the anaretic degree, there's also some anxiety and anticipation about what comes next. Venus will exit the sign of their domicile, Taurus, and enter into Gemini right after this conjunction. Mm, Doing so, they leave behind the resources and slowness and easy access to pleasure that they've been enjoying in their home and kind of stepping outside of that for new territory in the fast-paced sign of Gemini. Uranus will exit Taurus, where it has made its home for the past 7 years, and enter into Gemini, a sign that it hasn't been in since the 40s, although it made a quick dip in to test the waters from July to November of last year. And I feel like we're all kind of waiting with bated breath to see what this planet of shock and unpredictable change will do in the mutable sign of Gemini. And it feels like that angst is kind of getting charged up at this last degree of Taurus and the final days of their tenure in this fixed Earth sign. And as these planets come together at the edge of fixed Earth and share both hindsight and foresight, review and anticipation, how will they react with each other? Good question. Uranus seeks freedom and the elimination of structures that limit and constrain. Venus seeks connection, joy, and beauty. Uranus can be electrical and shocking. And it might shock us awake from some long slumber or malaise that has kept us from asking what we want or seeking out what we desire, or the pent up anxiety of this last degree of Taurus may become channeled through Venus, causing disruptions in our relationships and connections. There may be an unconscious desire to kind of exert control in a time where so many things feel out of our control, causing us to blow things up in our personal lives in the search for liberation, even if even if those things were providing stability. Because sometimes flipping the table is something that we can choose and control in that moment, even if the aftermath is beyond our control. The desire for freedom, novelty, excitement, newness is going to be really amplified. And it will show up in our experiences of beauty, pleasure, love, relationship, values, all these Venusian areas of life. And we may find an urge to seek more freedom and authenticity in these areas of our lives. And so just see if you can be aware of what's arising so you can make the changes you need to find the freedom you desire without needing to resort to drastic measures, which might create unintended consequences that then you will need to deal with down the line, which most likely will result in needing to do a lot of communicating, as both of these planets, Venus and Uranus, will be in Gemini by week's end. Okay, so also Thursday, April the 23rd, Venus will enter into Gemini. So slightly after they perfect their conjunction with Uranus. And I'm not going to put that up on the chart, but y'all can use your imaginations. So Gemini, a Mercury ruled air sign. It's mutable air. Very different than the Venus ruled fixed Earth of Taurus. And when Venus enters Gemini, they find their love of multiplicity and novelty. Gemini is an air sign, and like all air signs, it's interested in the idea and the ideal, and is not so much concerned with depth. Venus here likes to move from one thing to the next, engaging with different social groups and conversations, and then moving on when things get boring or there is the fear of getting locked down. They behave kind of like a butterfly, kind of flitting around from one flower to the next and never touching the ground. And boredom is the enemy of Venus and Gemini, and they have a fear of getting locked down or going into the depth. And there may be the fear of being truly seen. And if that flying feeling is sort of forced to come down to earth and touch the ground, or even worse, to do some digging to get below the surface of things, there can be oh, I'm out of here. I'm going on to the next thing. There's also the desire to move or shift if the reality doesn't meet the airy ideal that they have created in their minds. And so Venus here is fast paced and loves communication and conversation. They have a way with words and an eloquence, and their superpower is curiosity. And so with Venus and Gemini, there is a love of learning, of talking and expressing ideas. And there is an increased ability to communicate in beautiful ways. But we may find ourselves moving from one thing to the next with rapid speed. It may be worth considering that the real gems in what we love reveal themselves over time, whether it's an artwork or a piece of literature or a piece of music or a relationship. And with the fast-paced, high-flying energy of Venus and Gemini, there may be a benefit to kind of sitting with what we find beautiful and pleasurable so that it can reveal itself instead of operating through the fear that the grass is always greener somewhere else and we are wasting our time if we allow ourselves to sit for a moment and enjoy the beauty that is here for us. And so, with Gemini, which is the sign of the twins, it's all about holding multiple things, holding two things. And there's the desire to like move on and to check this out and to check that out and to like go see this person and go see that person. And can we hold that as well as, oh, can I be here for a moment? Can I sit with this for a moment? Can I allow this to unfold instead of like scratching the surface and jumping to the next and jumping to the next? And sometimes that quick movement can also inform our experience of pleasure and joy as we have a wider range of experiences or ideas that we can draw on and relate to. Okay, moving on to Saturday, April the 25th, we have the Sun in Taurus squaring Pluto in Aquarius. Let me pull up that transit. Uh, yep, right there. And so we have Pluto, Lord of the Underworld, right here at 5 degrees of Aquarius, 28 arc minutes, in a square with the Sun over there in fixed Taurus at 5 degrees and 28 arc minutes. Okay, my friends, Saturday is a big day. We have both the Sun squaring Pluto and then also Uranus moving into Gemini, which again is one of the bigger transits. The Uranus ingress is one of the bigger transits of 2026. And so coming back to this Sun square Pluto. Over the weekend, I watched the film Altered States, which I haven't seen in a long time. It's great. It's William Hurt in this movie from the 80s, which is loosely based on the work of Dr. John Lilly, who is a pioneer in consciousness. Did a lot of sensory deprivation and psychedelics. Also did some like pretty questionable research with dolphins. But anyway. The film is about a scientist who undergoes sensory deprivation and takes psychedelics, looking for proof of God and a kind of quantifiable encounter with the true self. And throughout the film, the character undergoes a kind of series of regressions in these psychedelic states. First into the shadow of the psyche as he encounters his religious trauma. Next, he regresses back into a kind of primal or proto-human, which he describes this as the pure feeling of being alive, only caring about his need for food and water, only worrying about his survival for that day. And he's like really into it. And lastly, he regresses to a sort of cellular consciousness that is connected to the cosmos. And I think this is a really good example of the sun square with Pluto. The sun is our ego identity. It's our sense of self as a unique individual, and that drive that is that like unique individual self that is driven by that inner light to live and pursue what we aspire towards. And then Pluto is our unconscious. It is the primal urges that drive us, as well as the repository of our shadow material. Pluto pulls us into the depths of ourselves and strips away that everything that isn't absolutely essential and causes us to confront our internal world and the shadow forms that exist there. And in this square, these two principles are at cross purposes. They are butting heads and they're seeking to find some form of resolution. In this case, it is the tension between who we believe ourselves to be, what we aspire towards, and the ways that we want to step into our potential as individuals, and our unconscious, which is just driven by survival impulses, suppressed desire, and unconscious urges and unacknowledged fears, which may be motivating our actions on a subterranean level. The question with this transit is how do we reconcile these two forces, the conscious ego and the unconscious drives? How can we make space for both of them and find a point of integration where one can inform the other? And Pluto often asks for a regression, for a descent. It pulls us into the underworld and uh, and alters that ego identity through that underworld journey. It strips away what is no longer necessary, whether we like it or not, and it initiates transformation of our identity and our sense of self. And so the square may pull us deeper into ourselves or provide access to a more primal mode of being, survival instincts and drives that are operating under the surface of our conscious reality, which through recognizing we may gain a better understanding of ourselves and how we can operate more authentically in our lives. If we are denying a part of ourselves, oh no, that's bad. Like, I can't do that. I can't have that. I can't want that. And sort of pushing that into a box in the unconscious, it can become problematic. And if we deny a part of ourselves, we are denying our whole self in a way. If we are an interconnected web of, the different parts of ourselves, and if one of them is not good, and we push that away, then we are, in a sense, denying our complete self. And I think in this square, it's an opportunity to look at like what are the things that I'm rejecting about myself, and how do I allow those a place of belonging or integration, even if there's fear around them. So this transit is a relationship between light and shadow. The upper day world, the day consciousness that operates on logic and rationale, that reaches towards the light, that is aspirational, and the underworld that sorry. And the underworld that sort of operates through subterranean drives and desires. And I apologize, I lost my place. Give me a second, my friends. It's one of those days. Mhm. Ah, okay. So we have this sort of tension between the upper world, the, day consciousness, and the underworld that operates through a much different logic. The underworld is a place of dreams and the unconscious. It is a place of symbols, not language, and shades, not forms. Yet these two worlds are kind of intrinsically linked. Every light source casts a shadow, and every shadow is formed through the light. Uh, James Hillman has this book, Dream in the Underworld, which is fantastic, also like slightly challenging. But in it, he writes, what goes on in the life of the ego is merely a reflection of one's deeper essence contained in the shadow. He continues saying that shadow is the very stuff of the soul, the interior darkness that pulls us downward out of life and keeps what one in relentless connection with the underworld. And we are all always in connection with the underworld, just as we are all always in connection with our shadow. The underworld is the inversion of life, and the shadow is the inversion of light. And in some ways, the shadow is the inversion of our life. But the shadow is always with us because of this, it can be viewed as an ally. Everywhere we go is our shadow. And in that sense, it's always with us and it's someone we can trust, someone who will never leave our side, whether we like it or not. And so with this square, we are faced with this kind of inversion of light and the inversion of life, this underworld or shadow form, which may exert its pull on us in some way. And, that pull, at the base of that pull is a need that is looking to be addressed. And so we may be confronted with the shadow over the weekend, the negative judgments of ourselves or feelings of inadequacy, of guilt or of shame, and um, which are the kind of shadows cast by the heroic sun that wants to shine, to be good, and to be seen for its light and its goodness. And then there's the inversion of that, the shadow, all of that guilt and shame that we hold, that we push away because if I am that, then I can't be good. But, that is everywhere there's a light, there's a shadow, and that shadow walks with us. And so, what is asked during the square is to hold both of these parts, the shining light and the shadow that it casts, the upper world with its aspirations and the underworld with its criticism, shame, and judgments. And by opening to both aspects of ourselves, we may come into a deeper understanding of who we are and what really motivates us. The underworld portion of this equation holds great riches. However, we need to have the courage to go and meet that and to welcome it. And Hillman goes on to say, underworld is a mythological style of describing a psychological cosmos. Put it more bluntly, underworld is psyche. And so, if that's the case with this transit, our ego and our psyche are in tension and they are seeking resolution in some way. And and I suppose what you do with that is up to you. But you might consider that whatever we resist persists. And, if we are denying that shadow part of ourself, it's going to get sort of more intense and keep asking to be seen, to be heard, and keep asking for integration. And we can only reject it for so long. Also, the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. So learning to accept that it's there, it's with us at all times, and how do we begin to work with it and allow it to become an ally? And so returning back to altered states, the main character's transformation comes through experiencing these various states of regression through shadow, primal desire, and eventually to cellular consciousness. And while that's probably not going to happen for most people during this transit, that sort of downward pull to the underworld, which causes us to face our shadow and these urges and these survival fears, may be what grants us access to transformation in some way, shape, or form. So it may be helpful to find ways of opening to the underworld of the psyche and to see what wisdom it might have for us and how that might further inform our conscious sense of self as well as what we aspire towards in our lives. Good day, Jeff. Nice to see you, my friend. Okay, moving right along. This is the last transit that I'm going to speak about today. Saturday, April the 25th, we have Uranus entering Gemini. There's a Mercury square and a sextile later in the week, but I'm skipping over those because you know what? I'm tired and I didn't have time to fully research them. But let me shift the chart along so that the folks back home can see this. Right. So Right here, we got Uranus entering Gemini. This is happening Saturday, April 25th at 6:51 p.m. That's Mountain Time. And then we have Mercury right there at 2 degrees of Gemini. So that conjunction of Venus and Uranus still in effect, even as they change signs, they're within 2 degrees of each other. Okay. Yeah, I sort of went down a wormhole on this one last night and did a lot of historical research, which is a kind of pet passion of mine. My father was a history professor for a long time when I was growing up, and so I have a love of historical events, and astrology has given me a great way of relating them to the present moment. So, yeah, I hope I don't bore you by throwing out dates. But yeah, we'll see how this goes. Okay, so Uranus made their first foray into Gemini between July 7th and November 7th of last year. And this brief period may have given us a preview of what Uranus in Gemini might feel like and behave like. Uranus spends about 7 years in a sign. And so that 6 month period may not have given us the full picture, but just a little taste. So you may want to think about what was going on last summer and fall as a little, I don't know, hors d'oeuvre of Uranus in Gemini. But it will unfold over the next 7 years. You can be sure of that. So Uranus will be in Gemini from April 25th, 2026, that's this Saturday, to August 3rd of 2032. They will retrograde back into Gemini from December 11th, 2032 until May 22nd of 2033, at which point Uranus will begin their tenure in Cancer. Also, for those folks who have their natal Uranus in Sagittarius, people in your early 40s, this is the beginning of your Uranus return. People, late 30s, or sorry, Uranus opposition, people late 30s, you will probably get your Uranus opposition in a couple of years. So, something to pay attention to. And if you're curious, perhaps booking a reading with a competent astrologer to help you figure out what that might mean for you. Anyway, the last time Uranus was in Gemini was between 1941, 1942, and 1948 to 49, which encompasses the time that America was involved in World War II, as well as the middle to end of Europe's involvement in World War II. In fact, America has always been at war with Uranus and Gemini, and I'm not saying this to freak people out. Correlation is not causation, but Uranus was in Gemini from 1774 to 1782, which was during the American Revolution. Then again from 1859 through 1866 during the US Civil War, and during the last period, and during that period was the last time Neptune was in Aries, oddly enough. And Neptune actually entered Aries the day after the US Civil War began. And then, just like I mentioned, the last time Uranus was in Gemini was from 1941 to 1949, which was during World War II. And so Uranus is a planet of revolution. Oh, actually, I just want to point this out. I mentioned that my dad was a history professor, and I just got an opportunity to see him. And he was a social historian and economic historian, but he was he's always reading books about battles and war, has like a love of the Civil War, is actually reading 3 books about Ulysses S. Grant. Anyway, I was like, yeah, so like if you're a social historian and economic historian, like why are you reading all these like books on the Civil War and biographies of, generals and stuff? And he's like, in history, war is what kind of shapes history. And it's the conditions, the economic and social conditions that come to a head that creates a breaking point through conflict that reshapes nations, that reshapes history. And, I am not a lover of war, but through the span of history, it is these conflicts that readjust the ways that social orders function. And so I pointed out that Uranus in Gemini, the US was always at war, or has been previously every time Uranus was in Gemini. Again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to happen this time. However, Uranus, as a planet of revolution and upheaval and liberation and sudden change, what it drives towards is those breaking points where things suddenly shift. And historically, war has been a way that societies, cultures, and nations have hit that breaking point and shifted in big ways. So I just wanted to point that out. So again, Uranus, revolution, sudden change, upheaval, etc. And Gemini is a Mercury ruled sign dealing with information, communication, exchange, and duality. And so as Uranus moves into this Mercury ruled air sign, there are these areas of life, these Mercurial and Gemini areas of life will go through big changes. And Mercury is a god of the marketplace and governs trade and the exchange of goods because in the exchange of goods and services, there is also the exchange of information. There is connection between people when they are doing business. And this is one of the reasons that Mercury presides over the marketplace. And one of the things that we are already seeing being impacted is trade and exchange. And currently, there is the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which is impacting global oil trade. Also, the currency that oil is traded in may be changing from the dollar to other forms of currency. Mercury dealing with money because money is an exchange. Money is an exchange of information. And in America, we're seeing acts of arson and other forms of monkey wrenching that are impacting inventory and supply, as well as a growing disgust for data centers, which house the information of the internet and AI. And communities are beginning to revolt against data centers and their drain on resources. So we're seeing kind of the shift in how we deal with exchange, how trade is dealt with, how information is stored. And so again, Uranus is a planet of upheaval and it seeks to break free from old forms to create and innovate something new and different. And over the past 7 years, Uranus has been in the fixed Earth sign of Taurus. And Taurus is slow and stable. It's focused on what it's tending to, on what works, what it values, and what is comfortable. And so, in order to create change in the stability of the Earth, the disruption needs to be pretty massive, kind of like an earthquake that shakes the ground and rearranges the terrain. And the global shifts that have occurred during Uranus's time in Taurus have been quite intense, from COVID to the rapidly expanding wealth gap and class inequality to the rise of fascism, right-wing authoritarian governments around the world, and the gutting of the federal government and social programs here in America by the Trump administration and a bunch of other heinous shit that they've done since Trump took office. And um, yeah, I watched this past election with Sam Reynolds, who is an amazing astrologer and a student of history. And he had called Trump winning for like months. And just like with the first Trump presidency, I didn't really want to believe it. And when we were watching the results being counted and it was clear that Trump was going to win, I asked him how he knew that that was going to happen. And he said that Uranus and Taurus was like a seismic shift, like tectonic plates shifting and creating new land masses. And Kamala Harris, who would have been better at kind of maintaining the status quo, did not bring what Uranus and Taurus required. And Trump, who is a very Uranian character, brought that quality of disruption and breaking from tradition and old structures, which is more of the embodiment of Uranus and Taurus. And I think actually a prime example of this is that he straight up tore down like a third of the White House within his first 100 days of being in office. And that is like a very clear example of breaking down old forms. And, I think another component of Uranus and Taurus, just reflecting on this, is the increasing wealth gap and the amount of people who have become billionaires during Uranus's 7 years in Taurus. It is drastically increased, which has, increased the wealth gap and wealth inequality. And I think that has been one of the major legacies of Uranus and Taurus. And as they move into Gemini, I think that's going to be a flashpoint for change. And so when Uranus moves into Gemini, which is a mutable air sign, Uranus's need to create change may come a lot more fluidly than it did in Taurus, where it had to like really, create these seismic shifts to affect change. And now that it's in this mutable air sign, I think that change becomes a lot easier. And it may result more through ideas and inventions and new forms of communication. Um, than through the kind of seismic shifts that Uranus and Taurus demanded in order to create the changes that it brings. Innovation and invention, as well as new forms of technology, travel, communication, are all hallmarks of Uranus and Gemini. Uranus is always kind of striving towards the ideal. It is driven by the idealized image of what could be possible, which stokes the fire of innovation. And these periods were times of great innovation, invention, and creativity. The period 1941 to 1948 saw the beginning of abstract expressionism in painting and marked the emergence of artists like Calder, Rothko, Noguchi, de Kooning, and Jackson Pollock. And actually, I think Jackson Pollock's drip painting style is a brilliant visual representation of Uranus and Gemini, breaking the borders of the canvas, breaking from old forms of painting and what painting was supposed to be, creating new forms of abstraction and developing visual connections in new and innovative ways. Also, Pollock's paintings seem almost like abstract images of synapses or neural connections in brain activity. And with Uranus in Gemini, Pollock created a revolutionary visual abstraction of brain activity, which feels incredibly fitting. um, Hold on, I'm gonna. Mm. Oh, thank you, Jeff. I will get back to that in a minute. I'll get back to your comment at the end of the show. So, here's another one. I love this one. On April 19th, 1943, with Uranus and Gemini, Albert Hoffman took the first hit of LSD ever, and then got on his bike and was riding home, and then all of a sudden was like, "Oh no, this is weird." And today is April 20th. Yesterday was April 19th, which is Bicycle Day, which is the remembrance of Albert Hoffman taking LSD for the first time in history and bringing that chemical, which is very Iranian, very revolutionary, creates new perspectives, new ideas, for better or for worse, into the world. And then in the 60s with sorry, in the 60s with Uranus in Virgo, which is squaring Gemini. Um, that was the countercultural and psychedelic revolution, and people like Timothy Leary kind of bringing that to the masses. And, there was this idea of like keeping psychedelics contained in the laboratory. And Timothy Leary was one of the people who broke them out of the laboratory and started the countercultural revolution. Also, it's pretty fitting that I haven't done a ton of research on this, but I believe that Trump just signed an executive order to speed up the trials of psychedelics. And Joe Rogan was there at the signing. I don't know. Things are getting real weird. But, we also see with Uranus, about to move into Gemini, we see psychedelics coming into the picture again. And I think that psychedelics has something to do with Uranus and Gemini and new forms of thought, new ways of perceiving, new ways of communicating. Also, shortly after Albert Hoffman dropped acid for the first time, the atom bomb was invented. And the first test occurred on July 16th of 1945, right here in the land of enchantment, New Mexico. However, the first atom bombs weren't dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima until Uranus was in Cancer. Um, the mobile phone was also invented in 1947, and it was proposed that the FCC allocate a large number of radio spectrum frequencies so that widespread mobile telephone service could be possible in the future. I think that's a pretty interesting one. And the transistor was invented on December 16th of 1947, and transistors are what make all computing possible. Transistors are basically a small electronic switch that switches electrical signals and power, and they basically operate in a binary. There is either an on, which gives a one, or an off, which gives a zero. And this is the basis for computer language and computing. And so with Uranus and Gemini, there is Gemini is a sign of the binary. It is the twins. It is me and the other. It is this and that, and with Uranus and Gemini, there's the potential of revolutionizing or breaking out of binary patterns or old forms of binary, which were, in the case of the transistor invention, kind of encoded during the last time Uranus was in Gemini. And this go breaking out of the binary may go for the ways that computing operates. And currently, with the invention of or innovation into quantum computing, which I know very little about, as well as the binaries that we have set up around gender and other forms of thought along true or false, black or white thinking. And we are already seeing, with the prevalence of AI in media and imagery, an increase in the difficulty of believing what we are seeing and the ability to discern what's true from what's false. And so I think these sort of binary ideas, right and left, right and wrong, true and false, black and white, man and woman. These are all going to shift and undergo kind of a revolution over the next 7 years. So, looking back at Uranus's time in Gemini from 1774 to 1782, we have the American Revolution, which set an example for other nations and revolutions, which would follow through the end of the 18th century. And we also have a period of innovation. In fact, during this time, Uranus was first discovered while in Gemini by William Herschel. This occurred in 1781. And the existence of Uranus had been posited by people in the past, but Herschel was able to observe that planet with the aid of a powerful reflecting telescope. And so Uranus was the first planet discovered through the use of technology. And I think this is really important in the kind of idea or archetype of Uranus, that it was beyond the limit of Saturn. Saturn was the limit of what we could see and what was out there. And Uranus was discovered through technology, through the aid of the telescope, which allowed us to see beyond the limit of Saturn. And so I think this idea of breaking limits, going beyond the limit, as well as the use of technology to move us beyond the limits of our human capacity is really encoded in Uranus. Also, in 1774, the electric telegraph was first invented by George Louis Lesage. And this was a prototype of what would later become the long distance telegraph, which I believe was patented in 1837. And the first telegraph had separate wires for each of the 26 letters of the alphabet, and its range was only between the two rooms of Lesage's house. Um, and the long distance telegraph would eventually be patented in 1837, which would revolutionize communication, allowing almost immediate communication across long distances and would transform businesses, journalism, diplomacy, and war. And before the internet, the electric telegraph created an interconnected and wired world and paved the way for modernity in the form of standardized time, global news, stock market synchronization, and transit coordination. And so the sort of seed of that was invented with Uranus and Gemini in the 1700s. Other inventions include other inventions during this time include the steamship, the submarine, both of which revolutionized transportation and exploration, and the flush toilet, which revolutionized daily life. And in 1780, Benjamin Franklin invented bifocal glasses, which provided a new way of seeing and new perspectives. And again, this idea of, with bifocals, with abstract expressionism, with LSD, we get new perspectives, new ways of seeing the world, new ways of kind of communicating what we're seeing. In the year after Uranus left Gemini in 1783, the hot air balloon was invented. And although the first flight occurred when Uranus was in Cancer, the idea and the work to develop it occurred throughout the time when Uranus was in Gemini, which a hot air balloon seems very Uranus and Gemini, sort of getting off the Earth and into the sky with some hot air. And so, with the period of Uranus and Gemini from 1859 to 1866, which was also the last time Neptune was in Aries, there was the invention of the Gatling gun, which was the first machine gun. There's a lot of military technology that is developed at this time, as well as dynamite, which was patented by Alfred Nobel, who the Nobel Peace Prize is named after, oddly enough. Nobel patented in 1867, the year after Uranus moved into Cancer. However, his research and development of dynamite occurred during the time Uranus was in Gemini. And dynamite is definitely Uranian. It creates sudden explosions and immediate changes to structures and landscape. And there is nothing that will take down an old form quicker than some dynamite. Also, during this time, Karl Marx was writing Das Kapital, which was published in 1867 and revolutionized economics and philosophy and was the driving philosophy of communism and the Russian Revolution. And Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, which revolutionized science and put forth the theory of evolution. And so Richard Tarnas relates Uranus to the Titan Prometheus, who is the god of foresight. He can see the potential in things and can see what they can be. So he is motivated to bring things to their fruition. And sometimes this desire to bring an idea to life can come at the expense of one's better judgment or can have unintended consequences as with as with the case as was the case with inventions like dynamite, the atom bomb, or AI. Oh, we got to do this because we can. I've got to see this. Oh, this is possible. We've got to get this to market. And then not really thinking about, okay, what is this going to do to the world? What is this going to do to our psyches? What is this going to do to our lives? And in the myth of Prometheus, His desire to bring fire to humanity resulted in Pandora being sent to Earth and her curiosity unleashing illness, anxiety, and fear upon the world. And as often, and curiosity is a key component of Gemini. And so I think with the, oh, I want to figure it out, oh, I've got to do this thing, I've got this vision, I've got this curiosity, it can also unleash some unnamed evils or some illnesses. As is often the case with new scientific discoveries or inventions driven by human curiosity, the desire to see an ideal come to life oftentimes creates a new set of issues and concerns that were not considered in the pursuit of the ideal. In the myth of Pandora, Mercury, ruler of Gemini, plays a role, and he hides hope at the bottom of Pandora's box. And although her curiosity unleashed all host of unspecified evils on the world, she also brings us hope, which I think is a really important thing to remember with Uranus's time in Gemini. And so both Uranus and Prometheus, or both Prometheus, his relationship with Uranus, and Mercury are tricksters. Prometheus tricks the gods into taking the worst part of the meat for their sacrifice, leaving the best parts of the animal for humans to eat, which really pisses Zeus off and gets us into this whole denying fire thing in the first place. But both Mercury and Prometheus challenge existing orders and push at the edges of existing structures until they change. The trickster changes the nature of reality through questioning its boundaries and pushing against its edges. And with Uranus and Gemini, we will see this increase in a questioning of reality, of authority, and of structure, which is going to pave the way for big social and collective changes. Again, technology, communication, exchange of information, as well as goods and services will go through big changes and upheavals during this period. We may see information and technology as well as fads and trends kind of speed up, and things will sort of emerge and disappear at a rapid pace. But I think is an important thing to remember is that Gemini is a sign of duality, which is seeking unity. It is learning to separate things out and to understand their component parts, and ideally to hold the tension of the opposite until something new can emerge. And I think about Gemini as like coming into a house that has all these boxes in it and being like, oh, I want to figure out what's in all of these, and sort of opening them all up and spreading them all out to see what the component parts are in each thing. And I think with Uranus and Gemini, it's just going to blow up all the boxes at once, you know, and then maybe be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna move on to the next thing. So, I think there's that potential. But, coming back to this duality and this kind of tension of the opposites, the idea is to hold this tension so that a secret third thing can emerge. And that secret third thing that it's through that we are really able to experience the power of Uranus's revolutionary potential. It's not this or that, but it's learning to hold both of them, and I think that's where the potential for change comes through. And with the planet of shock and sudden upheaval in Gemini, we may see a further polarization as the trickster Prometheus pushes things towards their limit in order to create the shifts that need to occur. And consider how you were able to sit in this tension and this separating out of the opposites to see what can emerge from that separation. And the recombination into the whole is the goal of this process. As Prometheus brings in the stolen fire, it uses it to help the alchemical process of recombination and the illumination of a new vision that can only be created through the separation and the tension that Gemini seeks. Whew. And with that, my friends, yeah, I bid you a fond farewell. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stop my share. Again, I'm Joan Emerson Bell. astrologer, tarot reader, blah, 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 blah. I like to do this every Monday. However, starting May 1st, I'm going to be traveling. I'm going to be in Greece running this retreat, and I will be taking some time off from this program. So I will see you at the end of May. I think I got one more week, and then I'm going to take a little vacation because, man, that is much needed in all this intensity. So, anyway, just wanted to give folks a heads up on that. And yeah, I hope you all have a beautiful week in space. And yeah, I will see you next week. Same wizard time, same wizard channel. And until then, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. And as always, may the force be with you. All right. Bye now.